Hello and welcome to this allegorical understanding of Revelation chapter 9. If you have not watched my videos for the previous chapters of Revelation, I very much recommend that you do. A lot of the important words, references and phrases repeated in Revelation 9 have already been explained and transliterated in those previous videos, and I won't be covering old ground unless it is completely necessary. There are also some instances where my book, The God Design, Secrets of the Mind, Body and Soul, can provide further understanding. Now, Christ exists in multiple layers and understanding. There's the spiritual, macrocosmic, gospel in the stars, the physical, historical figure, and the microcosmic or fluid substance within our human organism, the cosmic Christ. It would take a very long time to address these scriptures on all of those levels. Therefore, I aim to use whatever example provides the clearest interpretation in order to help us understand these ancient texts with clarity and vision. Now, my book does address those layers of Christ in more depth than these videos allow time for. If you have seen the other Revelation videos and would like to skip past this introduction, then just please fast forward a couple of minutes. So, as usual, I would like to highlight the fact that I do not claim to have all the answers. I have merely endeavoured to give the fairest and most substantiated analysis possible. So, I will be using the King James Version of the Bible as a point of reference because it is proclaimed to be the most authentic version that is widely available. I do, however, believe it necessary to say that the King James Version of the Bible is not original Bible text, and that many of the Bible stories themselves are not original, but rather they are evolutions of predated tales. For example, the Sumerian Great Flood. Now, for a more detailed introduction and a fair inquisition to the King James Bible, please watch the first 10 minutes of my Revelation chapter 1 video. As to why the scriptures are written symbolically and allegorically, the Bible answers that question too. In the book of Matthew, he asks Jesus, "Why do you speak to them in parables?" And Jesus said, "Therefore, I speak to them in parables, because seeing they do not see, and hearing they do not hear, nor do they understand, and in them the prophecy of Isaiah is fulfilled, which says, hearing you will hear and shall not understand, and seeing you will see and not perceive, for the hearts of this people have grown dull. Their ears are hard of hearing, and their eyes they have closed, lest they should see with their eyes and hear with their ears, lest they should understand with their hearts and turn, so that I should heal them. But blessed are your eyes, for they see, and your ears, for they hear. For assuredly I say to you that many prophets and righteous men desire to see what you see, and did not see it, and to hear what you hear, but did not hear it." So let's get into the first two verses of Revelation 9. "And the fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven unto the earth, and to him was given the key of the bottomless pit. And he opened the bottomless pit, and there arose a smoke out of the pit, as the smoke of a great furnace. And the sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit. Okay, now in chapter 7 we discovered that the fifth angel is the force of ether. And thanks to the Essene Gospel of Revelations, we know that the stars in his right hand, mentioned in chapter 1, are indeed the 7 angels of the Heavenly Father. So verse 1 describes this fifth angel, or ether, descending from the divine mind, heaven, into our bodies, or earth. Next it said, and to him was given the key of the bottomless pit. Well, keys are the understanding and the knowledge of I am in its highest aspect. If we know that I am is the provider and the all, then we have the key to inexhaustible resource, and we recognize that every affirmation and denial of thought, feeling, word and actions has a creative impact. To help grasp the meaning of I am, Charles Fillmore in Talks on Truth says, the I am is the polar star which around all thoughts of man revolve. But these keys are the keys to the bottomless pit. So let's look at the meaning of bottomless pit. This is the abyss. This is the void. The bottomless pit sounds like a terrible thing, but it's not at all. The fact that the pit is bottomless tells us everything we need to know. If there is no bottom to the pit, then there is no end to it, no materiality to it, and thus no reality to it whatsoever. It is an infinite whole, it's a nothingness. Therefore, anything that rises from it, be it a vision, a doubt, a depression, or a 16-headed monster, it is an imagination only. The Metaphysical Dictionary at Truth Unity puts it like this. The bottomless pit symbolizes the enigma of unreality brought into the appearance of reality. Stepping into the void, or the unknown, is where surrender occurs. Judgments cease, ego collapses, and a true foundation and unveiling of truth can take place. Thus we might say that the I am reveals the potential of the void. And then verse 2 goes on to say that when this bottomless pit opens, a powerful smoke or residue rises, and that the sun and air are darkened by this smoke. Now, a beautifully clear excerpt from the Essene Gospel of Revelation will help to define the smoke, which is indeed the imaginings of mind. And he spoke, man has created these powers of destruction. He has made them from his own mind. He has turned his face away from the angels of the Heavenly Father and the earthly mother, and he, man, has fashioned his own destruction. Thus, these self-made deceptions inhibit or darken the sun, aka Michael, the light, the solar energy, and the air, aka Raphael, the transporter of all vital energies. So the breakdown for verses 1 and 2 is: the force of ether activated and descended from divine mind into the body. Ether unlocks the understanding of the void. Ether opens the void, and fearful imaginings inhibit the light and destruction of vital energies. Okay, moving on to verses 3 and 4. And there came out of the smoke locusts upon the earth, and unto them was given power, as the scorpions of the earth have power. And it was commanded them that they should not hurt the grass of the earth, neither any green thing, neither any tree, but only those men which have not the seal of God in their foreheads. Okay, firstly, we see locusts emerging from the smoke. These are destructive, locust, thoughts and imaginings upon the earth or body. This imagery is taken from the fact that locust swarms destroy crops. This problem is really severe in places like Asia and Africa because locusts breed easily in warm, moist conditions, which just happen to be the exact conditions inside our physical bodies. And they assemble in massive groups to eat or destroy more and then cover vast areas. Just as these destructive thoughts can be purified by the divine mind, scientifically speaking, a microsporidia or gut parasite called Locusti can be used to control the swarming behaviour of migratory locusts and control locust plagues. The locusts are then said to be given power as the scorpions. Well, the power of a scorpion is its sting. This is what these destructive imaginings are being given. They're being given sting or power, the ability to invoke pain and suffering. Now, verse 4 goes on to say that these destructive entities must not harm the grass of earth. That's our aura around the body, and they're not allowed to harm any green thing. Well, in Revelation 4, we learn that green represents the undivided creative spiritual substance. So let's move on. Neither any tree. Well, we know that trees are the connection between heaven and earth, and that microcosmically speaking, trees are the nervous systems of the body. But only hurt those men which have not the seal of God in their forehead. Wow, okay. So the destructive imaginings are only able to hurt those men, which are thoughts, that are not aligned with God, the absolute one, holy goodness in their foreheads, the seat of intelligence. So the breakdown for verses 3 and 4 is: out of the imaginings came destructive thoughts that have power in the body. The destructive thoughts cannot harm the aura, the divine substance, or the nervous system, but only the ideas that are not aligned with God at the seat of intelligence. Okay, moving on to verses 5 and 6 now. And it was given that they should not kill them, but that they should be tormented 5 months. And their torment was as the torment of a scorpion when he striketh a man. And in those days shall men seek death, and shall not find it, and shall desire to die, and death shall flee from them. Well, verse 5 explains that these destructive thoughts do not have the authority to kill or stop the unaligned ideas, but that they were to be tortured for 5 months. Now, in gematria and numerology, number 5 is associated with 2 things: death and grace. Now, 5 is seen many times in the Bible. For example, there are 5 kings that represent our 5 physical senses. Now, our 5 physical senses have 5 inward counterparts. This is shown in the parable of the 10 virgins. The 5 outward physical senses, virgins, have no oil, whereas the 5 inward spiritual senses, virgins, do have oil, and oil is of course spiritual substance. So not only does our physical body have eyes and ears, but our soul has soul eyes and soul ears also. The 5 inward senses are in direct contact with spiritual substance, but the outer senses are only concerned with what we call reality. Allowing intuition, the inward senses, connected to God, to direct our lives is the path to enlightenment. Each of the 5 months refers to one cycle. A month always symbolises a cycle, as it was originally a word used to describe the cycle of the moon's phases. The scripture says that the torture must cease after the 5th cycle, month, or indeed at the beginning of the 6th cycle, which symbolises the awakening of the 6th sense, the most important sense. In other words, when the 5 inward senses have awakened, the 5th sense, intuition, activates. This doesn't necessarily mean a designated amount of time. The period taken to overcome each outward sense or cycle will be different for everyone. Now, verse 6 goes on to explain how when the 5 cycle phase of the scorpion begins, or when the suffering consciousness led by the 5 outward senses sets in, men and their thoughts will be desperate for the stinging to stop. But even if they were to try to stop the thoughts, it would seem impossible. So the breakdown for 5 and 6 is: the destructive thoughts have no authority to manifest death, but do inflict torture to the 5 outward senses via relentless aggravating or stinging. In this suffering consciousness, humans will feel desperate and long for a new cycle to begin. Okay, so moving on to verses 7 and 8. And the shapes of the locusts were like unto horses prepared unto battle, and on their heads were as it were crowns like gold, and their faces were as the faces of men. And they had hair as the hair of women, and their teeth were as the teeth of lions. Okay, so the shapes of the locusts were like horses prepared unto battle means that the destructive thoughts, or locusts, are within the bodies of mankind, horses, and charged, prepared for conflict or battle. Just like the 4 horses revealed in chapter 6 represent the emotional body, the red horse, the intellectual body, the black horse, the spiritual body, the white horse, and the physical body, the pale horse, these horses represent the many facets of the destructive instincts of mankind. Disproportioned defensive nature, spiteful nature, deceptive nature, greed nature, vengeful nature, etc. Next it says, and their heads were crowns like gold. Well, the fact that the horses' heads were crowned like gold shows their solar or human nature and highlights how the destructive thoughts manifest in and through humans. Humans are light beings. Hu means light and man means being. The light within us is the gold, the light energy. The crowns of gold speak to the locusts coming to life within. In this scenario, we light beings are using our creative powers to create destructive thoughts. Now, this is validated once more by the following line. And their faces were as the faces of men. In other words, their identities, bases, are men, thoughts. Now, verse 8 illustrates these destructive thoughts as having hair like women. Well, traditionally, women had long hair, and hair symbolises ideas. So in this context, hair symbolises bad ideas, ideas of malice and deceit, leaving our consciousness or head and growing or materialising in the atmosphere, thus creating thoughts and perhaps deeds that are erroneous and vicious. Teeth of lions. Just before I read the breakdown for verses 7 and 8, I think it's also important to note a suspected link between so-called demonic entities and parasites. Now, the suffix para at the beginning of the word parasite points to metaphysical or non-materialized realms. The second syllable, site, means location, of course. So you might say that these parasites are a location of entry for metaphysical entities, good and bad alike. Yes, there are good parasites as well. Our thoughts and imaginings create manifestations. Our state of being, i.e. our thoughts, emotions, vibrations, habits, diets, actions, etc., literally affect our bodies and the environment that we live in. The bad parasites perpetuate our bad behaviour by controlling our minds and limiting our potential to be free. So let's have a quick look at a couple of destructive mind-controlling parasites. Number 1, Enterobius vermicularis. It's an intestinal parasite. Now, here's a quote. It says, "This parasite may cause damage on the mind and body in different degrees." And that is from the National Centre of Biotechnology. Number 2, T. cruzi is a blood parasite. Quote, T. cruzi affects organs such as the heart, brain, spleen and kidney. And again, that's from the Centre for Biotechnology. These two examples are among hundreds of species of microscopic entities that literally wreak havoc not only on our physical bodies, but also our thought patterns and our emotions. Some parasites have the ability to cause and promote depression and anxiety via mind control through thought hijacking, and others literally create addiction. The only way to fully cleanse ourselves of these manipulative toxins is through detoxification, body, mind and soul. So the breakdown for verses 7 and 8. The destructive thoughts are within humans, goading them into conflict and useless ways. They are abundant, erroneous, and armed to destroy. Okay, continuing on with Revelation 9, verses 9 and 10. And they had breastplates, as it were breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings was as the sound of chariots, of many horses running to battle. And they had tails like unto scorpions, and there were stings in their tails, and their power was to hurt men 5 months. Okay, so breastplates typically featured 12 precious stones, and each stone represented one of the tribes of Israel, which are the faculties of man. A breastplate such as this being placed over the breast shows the 12 properly functioning faculties protecting the heart center and indeed the solar plexus. The fact that the destructive thoughts are wearing breastplates of iron shows that they too have their defense system in place. Iron is related to the tribe of Nephilim, which is the faculty of our core, our central will. If our core beliefs are rooted in love and wisdom, Nephilim can be a place of vision. But if our core beliefs are rooted in fear, Nephilim is a place of terror. In this context, John's vision is revealing the terror caused by fear-based thinking. The destructive thoughts are indeed strong and resilient, like iron. Moving on, the sound of their wings was as the sound of many chariots running into battle. Well, the sound of their wings is a vibration, a power, or a force. Wings flutter so quickly that they become invisible and inaudible, just like the sounds or words that are creating our reality at all times. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. Chariots represent bodily functions. For example, the protein molecules that chauffeur endorphins to the brain. Thus, the vibrations are transporting the fear thoughts and biochemicals as a residue of that all over the body, making the outward appearance of the destructive thoughts more and more terrifying by the moment. Then we have verse 10, which is a repetition of verse 5. It's this analogy of a 5-month, 5-cycle tribulation by locusts. It's being used to describe the cycles of the outer versus the inner senses. But again, it is important to remember that in this context, there is no specific duration of the inner trial. Life is an ongoing test of vigilance to overcome the outward senses and remain rooted in truth and love. The stings, or the power in their tails, illustrates the low tail end vibrations at the base of our spine, tail, that can't get off the ground or gain momentum or achieve enlightenment. So the breakdown for verses 9 and 10 is: the destructive thoughts have strong and resilient defences. Their vibrations transport and facilitate erroneous behaviour, malicious ideas, harmful biochemical secretions, and parasitic entry to the body. The destructive thoughts have futile vibrations, challenging the 5 cycles of the inner versus the outward senses. Okay, moving on to Revelation 9 verses 11 and 12. And they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in the Hebrew tongue is Abaddon, but in the Greek tongue hath his name Apollyon. One woe is past, and behold, there come 2 woes more hereafter. Okay, so verse 11 tells us that the destructive thoughts are ruled by a king, who is the angel of the bottomless pit. Well, we know that angels are forces or messengers, and that the bottomless pit is devoid of all potential. Now the scripture goes on to say that the king's name is Abaddon in Hebrew and Apollyon in Greek. Both the Hebrew word Abaddon and the Greek word Apollyon literally mean destroyer or destruction. Thus we know for sure that the driving force, king, of these armies is deceptive and erroneous core thoughts and belief. As long as humankind believe in materiality and destruction, Abaddon, outer destruction of forms will take place. It is very important for our future that these imaginings cease, so that the outward manifestations can evolve and be replaced by peaceful, loving alternatives and emanations. Now, verse 12 is a reference to the proclamation made at the end of the previous chapter. If you remember, in chapter 8, verse 13, the scripture said, "Woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth, by reason of the other voices of the trumpet of the three angels." Now, there are three woes expressed there. Therefore, this verse is telling us that the first woeful angel or force of destruction, aka Abaddon, or indeed Apollyon, has now been introduced. But there are still two more to come. So the breakdown for verses 11 and 12 is: the ruling force of the void is destruction. The first doom has been introduced. There are still two more. Okay, moving on to Revelation 9, verses 13 and 14. "And the sixth angel sounded, and I heard a voice from the four horns of the golden altar which is before God, saying to the sixth angel which had the trumpet, Loose the four angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates." Okay, so the sixth angel being introduced here is the force of spiritual judgment, also known as Archangel Zachariah. The sounds, or indeed the vibrations from the four horns of the golden altar, are four powers, four vibrations. Just like trumpets are powers, vibrations, so are horns. And we know already from previous chapters that the altar is the seat of consciousness. It's the place in our mind where error thoughts must be burned or sacrificed. From this verse, we see that the altar is also the place where the force of spiritual judgment, the sixth angel, Zachariah, enters consciousness. Once again, the gold, or the ore, is the creative living light, comprised of both male and female aspects. In verse 14, this sixth angel, the force of spiritual judgment, has the power. It had the trumpet. It's told to activate the four angels bound in the great river Euphrates. Now, these four angels are the forces from chapter 7 that hold the four winds, namely the directional powers, north, south, east and west, within the cerebrospinal fluid and of course within our practical reality. And specifically at the cerebrospinal axis, where the currents of the river Euphrates meet. So the breakdown for verses 13 and 14 is: the forces of spiritual judgment activated, and the four vibrations were recognized at the seat of consciousness. Thus, the force of spiritual judgment activates four helpful directional currents within the cerebrospinal fluid. And now, moving on to Revelation 9, verses 15 and 16. "And the four angels were loosed, which were prepared for an hour, and a day, and a month, and a year, for to slay the third part of men. And the number of the army of the horsemen were 200,000, and I heard the number of them." Okay, so the four directional forces are set free. They're loosed. And then they were prepared for an hour a day, and a month, and a year. This just means that the forces are continuously and consistently prepared. Metaphysically speaking, just as the 5 months in the earlier verses doesn't pertain to a set amount of time, but it just shows a whole process, neither does this description. Divisions of time are all calculated and decided upon by mankind, because from a spiritual viewpoint, time doesn't exist, especially not in the way that we've come to understand it. This is symbolized in so many books and films. For example, when the children in C.S. Lewis's The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe travel to a spiritual realm and live their entire lives there, but when they return through the wardrobe, they realize that no time has passed in their material reality. Now, as a possible explanation as to why King James's council decided to add this particular time period into the Bible, because it's not mentioned in the Essene version, is due to the fact that the total of 1 year plus 1 month plus 1 day plus 1 hour equals 1.08 years. And 108 is the number of wholeness. It's so poignant. For example, in ancient Vedic maths, it's regarded as the number of wholeness and completion. So it's a process. Stonehenge is 108 feet in diameter. The Japanese chime a bell 108 times to celebrate New Year's Day. And Gnostics believe that it takes 108 chances or lifetimes to totally purify the ego. Now, this last example is really fitting to what is taking place in this chapter of Revelation, especially being that the slaying of the third part of a man is about slaying the psychic plane, the illusion of being, and more commonly known as the mental plane or the intellectual body. The mental plane or the psychic plane is the conscious workings of thought, not necessarily through the brain where we do have some control over them, but also through their own power and force. So in other words, the 4 directional forces are continuously prepared to complete the task of purifying the psychic intellectual body, third part of mankind. So moving on to verse 16, we see that an army or a swarm of horsemen manifesting thoughts were 200,000 in number. That's 200 million materializable thoughts ready to slay or purify the third part of man. Now, in numerology, 200 million reduces to 2. Now, among other things, 2 symbolizes union. Thus, we see that the union of energies, male and female, purifies the third part of man. Just like in Revelation chapter 5, the thousand signifies the proportional immensity of these horsemen, these manifesting thoughts that are working for us, assisted by the 4 directional forces, the angels in the cerebrospinal axis. It's interesting to read the next part, which says, "And I heard the number of them," rather than "I felt" or "I saw the number of them." Once again, this description gives a huge nod to all of the creative forces or angels, which are the seeds, the words, the sounds, the vibrations of God, the creative oneness. So the breakdown for verses 15 and 16 is: the 4 helpful directional forces flow continuously and consistently to purify the psychic, mental body of mankind. The huge swarm of creative thoughts are united and purifying. Okay, moving on to Revelation 9 verses 17 and 18. And thus I saw the horses in the vision, and them that sat on them, having breastplates of fire and of jacinth and brimstone, and the heads of the horses were as the heads of lion, and out of their mouths issued fire and smoke and brimstone. By these three was the third part of men killed, by the fire and by the smoke and by the brimstone which issued out of their mouths. Right. John sees the manifesting thoughts in his supernatural sight, vision, and the riders or driving force of them are protected, breastplates, by fire, jacinth and brimstone. Okay, the fire is the vivifying spirit. The jacinth is a stone of self-realisation, understanding and preparation, and, as we know from previous chapters, brimstone is sulphur. Sulphur is an essential protein mineral used by the body for a number of purposes, and it acts directly on the liver. Sulphur is essential in purification and the expulsion of waste. Okay, so moving on, the verse says, and the heads of the horses were as the heads of lions. Well, once again, we know that the lion represents solar energy. This is the whole human-like thing. So the final part of verse 17 says, out of their mouths issued fire and smoke and brimstone. Again, this speaks of vivifying power, fire, burning useless mental, psychic deceptions, which produces residue, smoke, and sulphur, the purifying mineral. In alchemy, sulphur represents evaporation and dissolution. Now, verse 18 goes on to say that these three things, fire, smoke and brimstone, kills the third part of mankind. Again, the mental, psychic body or plane of being. So the breakdown for 17 and 18 is, I saw the manifesting thoughts with supernatural sight and their driving force protected by vivifying power, self-realisation and purifying minerals. They were charged by Christ energy. They utilised spirit, creating residue by sulphur. These things cleansed the mental, psychic body. Okay, now verses 19 to 21. For there is power in their mouth and in their tails, for their tails were like unto serpents and had heads, and with them they do hurt. And the rest of the men which were not killed by these plagues yet repented, not of the works of their hands, that they should not worship devils and idols of gold and silver and brass and stone and of wood, which neither can see, nor hear, nor walk, neither repented of their murders, nor of their sorceries, nor of their fornications, nor of their thefts. Now, on a physiological note, we can again take parasites into consideration when interpreting these verses. There are hundreds of scary looking microscopic parasitic creatures that cause havoc in our bodies and our brains. Parasites can promote addictions to all kinds of idols. For example, certain parasites feed on alcohol. Thus, they require alcohol inside us to thrive. So if an alcoholic suddenly stops drinking alcohol, then the parasites will crave it in order to stay alive. In other words, the cravings of the parasites become the cravings or addictions of the person. That's why those urges feel so uncontrollable. Now let's get back to the metaphysical symbols. Okay, verse 19. Their power is in their mouth. Again, we know that creative power lies in sound vibrations, the mouth, and in their tails, for their tails were like unto serpents. This is referring to the creative power present at the base of the spine, tail, which travels through the nadis, serpents. Moving on to verse 20, we see that the rest of men, thoughts, which were not killed, purified by these plagues, or hurt not. That means that they continue to be erroneous. These thoughts, they continue to be deceived by illusion, deceptions in the mental or psychic body. They tell us to worship evils or devils and material goods which have no true value and are literally rendered useless, neither can see, nor hear, nor walk, when compared to the creative, infinite power of all, God. And finally, verse 21 says that deceptive thoughts continue to justify all kinds of evil, including murder, sorceries, wasteful sexual acts, and stealing. So the breakdown for verses 19 and 21. Their power, their vibrations, and their energy travels through the nadis. The thoughts that have not been purified by these trials continue to be deceived by the material world and continue to initiate all kinds of evils. So the conclusion, or the full breakdown for chapter 9, let's go for it. 1 and 2. The force of ether activated and descended from divine mind into the body. Ether unlocks the understanding of the void. Ether opens the void, and fearful imaginings inhibit the light and distribution of vital energies. Out of the imaginings came destructive thoughts that have power in the body. The destructive thoughts cannot harm the aura, the divine substance, or the nervous system, but only the ideas that are not aligned with God at the seat of intelligence. The destructive thoughts have no authority to manifest death, but do inflict torture to the 5 outward senses via relentless aggravating. In this suffering consciousness, humans will feel desperate and long for a new cycle to begin. The destructive thoughts are within humans, goading them into conflict and useless ways. They are abundant, erroneous, and harmed to destroy. The destructive thoughts have strong and resilient defenses. Their vibrations transport and facilitate erroneous behaviour, malicious ideas, harmful biochemical secretions, and parasitic entry to the body. The destructive thoughts have futile vibrations, challenging the 5 cycles of the inner and outward senses. The ruling force of the void is destruction. The first doom has been introduced. There are still 2 more. The force of spiritual judgment activated, and 4 adverse vibrations were recognized at the seat of consciousness. Thus, the forces of spiritual judgment activates 4 helpful directional currents within the cerebrospinal fluid. The 4 directional forces flow continuously and consistently to purify the psychic, mental body of mankind. The huge swarm of manifesting thoughts were united and purifying. I saw the manifesting thoughts with supernatural sight and their driving force, protected by vivifying power, self-realisation, and purifying minerals. They were charged by solar energy. They utilised spirit, creating residue by sulphur. These things cause death to the mental psychic body. And their power, their vibrations, and their energies travels through the nadis. The thoughts that have not been purified by these trials continue to be deceived by the material world and continue to initiate all kinds of evils. Okay, thank you very much for watching. I really do hope that you enjoyed this allegorical study of Revelation chapter 9. Special thanks to all of my patrons, specifically Christopher Hill and Cindy Jewell, whose generosity is a massive blessing. The research, writing and making of these videos does take a lot of time and it does cost money, so if you would like to support via Patreon, I would be truly grateful. Here are the links to all of my social media, buying my book, and don't forget that my app, Freedom Yoga, based on the Essene way, is available on both Android and iOS. Thanks again. Peace and light.